Fever, 1793, Chapter 13, September 10th, 1793. American ladies require a peculiar mode of education. Dr. Benjamin Rush, speech of the Young Ladies' Academy of Philadelphia. The mockingbird whistled and I woke with a start. I laid my hand on grandfather's chest, his heart beat like a battle drum. My throat was parched, but the canteen was empty. I set off for the stream, King George fluttering behind me. I hoped grandfather would sleep a while. Pretty Matty, the creature called. What do you want? I muttered. How could I get grandfather to a doctor? If only I could send word to Eliza she could arrange for a carriage with a doctor and food, and a clean shift. A breeze rattled through a cornfield, lifting the leaves with outstretched arms. King George landed on my shoulder. Tea, Matty, I need tea. I brushed him off. Hush, you foolish creature, or I'll make a pillow out of you. Mother thought I was safe at Newnet, slopping the pigs and hoeing the fields. Would she worry when grandfather didn't return? I kicked a rock down the road. Why couldn't I have acted strong and calm like Eliza instead of blubbering like a baby? I disgusted mother. She knew I was weak, but I bet she wanted sons. Instead, she got a backward, lazy girl child. I kicked the rock deep into the brambles. I shook my head to rid it of the dark thoughts. I would only consider the good. Mother was surely getting stronger with every hour. Grandfather and I would find a carriage or wagon that could give us a ride to Luddington's. When we arrived, we would find a letter from Mother telling us that all was well and we could go home. I took a deep breath. I felt better to think about pleasant things. Matty child, buy me rum. King George landed on a wild rose bush. Go on with you, Fleabag. Find us a pot of porridge or an apple pie. I worked my way around a patch of thistles. The sun burned off the haze and dew vanished. My stomach rumbled. If only that blasted farmer had left our food hamper, along with cinnamon buns. Eliza had packed hot cakes and ham, a crock of cherry preserves, another of garlic pickles, and hard ball of cheese carefully wrapped. I reached the stream hungry, hot, and tired, with no prying eyes around. I slipped off one of the petticoats, washed in the water, and hung it over a willow branch to dry. I waded in up to my knees, and stood until my toes felt as if they were in snowbank. What would Nathaniel think if he saw me like this? Would he think me a finer catch than any trout? When the cold became unbearable, I climbed out of the water to pick berries. It was hard not to think of our kitchen table with bowls of oyster stew, or corn soup, or a platter of duck, sweet potatoes, and buttered beans, Indian puddings with molasses, or better yet, apple brown Betty with extra sugar on top. The sound of fish leaping from the water interrupted my fantasies. I turned in time to see scales reflecting the sunlight as a fish slid downstream. Fish! But how to catch one with neither line nor hooks? Where was Nathaniel Benson and his fishing pole when I needed him? My wet petticoat swayed in the breeze. I would have to do. I tried to rip open the seam with my teeth, but the tiny stitches that mother had sewed would not yield. Another fish wiggled to the top of the water to gulp down a water bug. If I had sewn the skirt, it would have been easy to tear apart. Instead, I would have to use a towel. I pulled the drawstring at the waist tightly until I could barely poke my thumb through the opening. I would hold the open hem and pray an unusually stupid fish would swim into the trap. I bet no soldier ever thought of this one, I said, wading back in water with my improvised net. My feet iced right away, and it was hard to find a comfortable position. I had to bend over at the waist, wave the petticoat in the water to make it float, then stand without moving. I wiggled my toes to bring some feeling back in them. How could my feet be so cold while my head was so hot? A bee burst in front of my face. In the distance, I heard a carriage escaping from Philadelphia. Food first, rescue second. I blew the bee away. Where was a stupid parrot? He could be useful and feast on this pest. A fish brushed against my ankle. Come, little fishy, come down, I murmured. My arm shook from the effort of holding the petticoat open. The fish paused at the edge of the net. Just a few more inches. That's it. Keep swimming. The bee landed on my mop cap just above my eyebrows. I concentrated on the fish. You're almost there, my little fried breakfast. Don't stop now. I prepared to close the petticoat and trap the fish inside. One, two, tea, Maddie! King George swooped straight at my head and snatched the bee. The explosion of feathers in my face sent me crashing into the water. I came up sputtering and saw the trout flick his tail and head downstream, where there were no gulls with petticoats and no parrots. I will roast you, I shouted at the king, shaking my dripping petticoat in his direction. Fresh thing, he replied. There was no time to try for another fish. Grandfather was alone and without water. I filled the canteen, scoured the bushes for the last berries, and hurried back. Grandfather's eyes were still clear, but his nose was red and his throat raspy. Cold, he said. Cold, are you cold? How could he be cold? The sun had nearly dried my wet skirts. He shivered. Shall I make fire? He closed his eyes and nodded. Even the effort of speaking a few sentences had exhausted him. At home, I would borrow a burning twist of paper from a neighbor when all the fires in the house were cold. I couldn't remember the last time I saw a fire started with flint and tinder. I didn't even have flint and tinder. Grandfather shivered and moaned. I washed his face and neck with a damp petticoat that didn't catch fish. It seemed to comfort him. Is there anything to eat? I coughed and shook my head. All we have are these berries, Grandfather. Of course, I forgot. He ate a few. We need food. I thought about telling him how close I had been to capturing that trout, but I hated to admit defeat. Grandfather struggled to remove a pouch from his vest. There must be a farmer hereabout. Pay for a meal and the loan of a few blankets. I can't leave you. You look worse. He held up his hand. I will be fine. I will sit here and watch the wind blow. Think about old friends. We need food and blankets. Off with you. The sun was at its highest as I set out on my search. It felt like bonfire spitting embers on my head. I took the first narrow road that branched off towards the east, sure that it would lead to a farm. The man hoeing a field of potatoes took one look at me and ran off. I followed him to farmhouse, but the door was locked. Go away, shouted a voice inside. We have children in here. We can't help you if you have the fever. What was wrong with this world? Would I next see birds flying backward or cows crotcheting doilies? I walked on, stopping now and then to cough on or rest my legs. The heat rolled to the horizon like waves toward shore. Except for a few raspberries, I had eaten nothing for 2 days. A flock of geese flew overhead. I could only think of how they would taste with roast potatoes. Grandfather would need more water soon. I needed to go back. I stumbled along, head down, fishing to keep my eyes from closing. My shoes squashed something brown and green and soft. I shuddered and hurried my pace. I could never bite totted fruit. It drew flies. Fruit, fruit! I spun around, wide awake and hungry. Above me hung branches heavy with green, speckled pears. I grabbed one and bit into it, ignoring the juice that ran down my fingers and chin. I gathered as many pears I could carry and set off with new energy to find Grandfather. With food, we could hold out for days. I didn't notice when the pears grew heavy. By the time the chestnut tree was in the sight, they felt like tiny animals weighing me down. I breathed heavily and focused on moving 1 foot at a time. I turned around. Did I hear voices whispering? A swarm of gnats flew into my eyes. I stumbled and dropped a few pears. I looked up. The chestnut tree seemed farther away. I felt like I was sliding backward. I wasn't walking on a dirt road. I was slipping across the frozen river. The sun wasn't made of fire. It was a monstrous snowball. My teeth clattered together. What was wrong with me? I saw a figure stand under the tree. I tried to call Grandfather's name but could make no sound. The wind carried a roaring sound. Why was I carrying these rocks? I stumbled. Where was Mother? Where was Eliza? The balloon? I will be up in a minute. Mother, just let me sleep. Then blackness.